What happens when a student rejects his teacher's theory? In the 4th century BC, there was a young man from Macedonia. He entered Plato's academy, but didn't accept his ideas. He found his own way and laid the foundation of science. Tonight, we will discover the story of Aristotle, Alexander's teacher. Before moving to our video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Share in the comments which city you're following us from. Now let's begin the journey of the philosopher who looked at the earth instead of the sky. Aristotle was born in 384 BC in the city of Stagira in northern Macedonia. It was a small town, but a special one because it was close to the Macedonian kingdom. His father, Nicomachus, was a physician at the royal court, and this shaped young Aristotle's life. When he entered his father's study as a child, he would see anatomical drawings, medical instruments, dried plants. His father showed him the human body, explained how organs worked. This is how his curiosity about science began, at the court, as a physician's son. However, life taught him pain very early. When he was 10 years old, first his mother died, shortly after his father too. The orphaned child was raised by his guardian Proxenus. Perhaps these early losses made Aristotle someone who thought so deeply. A child who knows death at a young age, observes life more carefully, finds every moment more valuable, learns early that everything has a beginning and an end. Years passed and young Aristotle grew up. Proxenus gave him a good education, but Aristotle wanted more. He didn't want just to memorize poetry. He wanted to understand the world. He wanted to learn how things worked. When he turned 17, his guardian made him a life-changing offer. He could go to Athens and join Plato's academy. Aristotle accepted with excitement. Athens at that time was the world's center of ideas, the capital of philosophers. Plato was 60 years old, and the academy had been open for almost 40 years. The brightest minds were flocking there because true freedom of thought existed within its walls. Young Aristotle boarded a ship and set out from Macedonia toward Athens. He crossed the Aegean Sea, watched the waves. He didn't know that this journey would completely change his life, bring him to the stage of history. When he arrived at the academy, Plato accepted him. The old philosopher liked the young man because Aristotle was intelligent, curious, asked questions tirelessly. The first days were fascinating. Walking in the academy's garden, famous philosophers passed by him. Everyone was debating something. Ideas were flying in the air. There were mathematics lessons, astronomy lessons, philosophy discussions. But over time, something caught his attention, and this attention turned into discomfort. At the academy, everyone was talking about the theory of forms. According to Plato, the things we see in this world weren't real. They were only shadows. The real world was elsewhere, in the world of forms. For example, the horses we see in the world were imperfect copies. The real horse was up there somewhere, perfect, unchanging, eternal. Aristotle listened to this, but something inside him began to feel wrong. Was there really another world? Why assume something we can't see, can't touch, can't test? The horse before you is breathing, running, neighing, smells of sweat. Isn't this horse real? Why should we say this horse isn't real? This seemed unnecessary to Aristotle, even illogical. But he was still a young student. He kept these thoughts hidden, showed respect to his teacher, but began accumulating questions in his mind. He stayed at the academy for 20 years. Full 20 years. Plato valued him greatly because Aristotle was incredibly productive. incredibly intelligent. He devoured every text, Homer's epics, Herodotus's histories, Hippocrates' medical writings, Democritus's atomic theory. But he didn't merely absorb. He thought, criticized, took notes, developed his own ideas. The ideological difference between them was growing secretly, but steadily. Plato looked upward, to the sky, to the stars, to the world of forms. To him, reality was there, perfect, unchanging. Aristotle looked downward, to the earth, to stones, plants, animals. To him, reality was here, changing, developing, growing. Plato loved mathematics because mathematics reached eternal truths. The sum of the internal angles of a triangle is always 180 degrees. This never changed. Aristotle loved biology because biology studied life, change, development. From seed comes tree, from egg comes bird. This process was magnificent. Both were seeking truth but looking in different directions. Plato at the stars in the sky, Aristotle at the earth beneath his feet. At the seashore, Aristotle would linger for hours, watching the waves, examining the rocks, collecting sea creatures. He would take mussels, starfish, sea anemones, and bring them to the academy. He would place them on his desk, examine their anatomy, break their shells, draw the structures inside. Other students were surprised by this, but Aristotle didn't care. He was seeking reality here, under his hand, before his eyes. Then, in 347 BC, Plato died. He was 80 years old, had lived a long life. Aristotle felt deep sadness. They had been together for 20 years, had debated for 20 years. He loved his teacher, respected him deeply, but didn't agree with his ideas. This was a sign of philosophical maturity, respecting someone, but not agreeing with them. A new head of the academy was to be elected, and everyone thought Aristotle would be chosen. He was the most senior, most knowledgeable, most productive student. But he wasn't chosen. Plato's nephew, Speusippus, was selected instead. This was a great disappointment, and Aristotle made a bold decision. He left Athens. He was 40 years old, had spent half his life at the academy. Now it was time to emerge from his teacher's shadow and light his own flame. First he went to the city of Assos, on the west coast of Asia Minor. There an old academy friend, Hermias, was the ruler. Hermias welcomed Aristotle enthusiastically and provided him facilities to conduct research. Aristotle relaxed here and finally began doing the research he wanted. Every morning he would descend to the seashore. As the sun rose, he would walk among the rocks, peer into tide pools, examine sea creatures. He would collect mussels, fish, octopuses, bring them home, study their anatomy. He would compare their similarities, note their differences. Which animal belonged to which group? Which ones resembled each other? This is where real science was beginning. He also met Hermias's niece Pythias, and at first an intellectual closeness formed between them. Then this turned into love. They married, and Aristotle was happy for a while. But this happiness didn't last long, because the Persians were threatening Asia Minor. The Persian king declared Hermias a traitor and had him captured. Hermias was tortured, but didn't betray his friends. Finally, he was killed. When Aristotle received this news, he was devastated. He had to flee with Pythias because their lives were in danger. They took refuge on the island of Lesbos. This island was in the middle of the Aegean, a safe harbor. Here, too, he continued his research, because Aristotle didn't know how to stop. He explored the island's lagoons, observed birds, counted their eggs, tracked migration routes. He was noting everything, recording everything, as if he was trying to catalogue the world, to classify everything, to give order to everything. Then, in 343 BC, an unexpected, incredible offer came. King Philip II of Macedonia wanted him to give private lessons to his son Alexander. This wasn't an ordinary request. Alexander was 13 years old at the time, and would one day be the king of Macedonia, perhaps even more. Aristotle hesitated. He had been living in the academic world for years. Would he now return to the court? But then he thought, perhaps I can educate this young prince. Perhaps I can teach him not just war, but wisdom too. Perhaps I can make him a philosopher king. Perhaps I can achieve what Plato couldn't in Sicily. Finally, he accepted this offer and went to Macedonia. The city of Pella was ostentatious but harsh. The palace was full of intrigues. Generals were engaged in power struggles. And in the middle was Alexander, 13 years old, blonde-haired, wild, ambitious. He loved riding horses, using swords, but was bored with reading books. Aristotle approached him and tried to show him a different world. First he won his trust, then lessons began. But these weren't ordinary lessons. Aristotle read Homer to him, told him the epics of Achilles. Alexander was enchanted because he wanted to be like Achilles, wanted to be an immortal hero. Aristotle read him Greek tragedies, the works of Sophocles, Euripides. Alexander began to understand tragedy, saw what hubris meant, the power of fate. Aristotle taught him ethics, explained what virtue was. Courage wasn't just recklessness, it was bravery combined with wisdom. Aristotle taught him politics, discussed how the ideal state should be. Aristotle taught him science, taught him to observe nature, to be curious, to ask questions. It continued like this for 3 years, and these 3 years changed both of them. Alexander became a curious, open-minded, thinking youth. He was no longer just a warrior. He was also a thinker. Aristotle saw the power of influencing a young person. He had planted a seed. Perhaps this seed would grow. But when Alexander turned 16, his father left him as regent and went to war. Alexander defeated enemies, brought victories. When Aristotle heard this, he worried because Alexander loved war too much, loved bloodshed too much. At 18, Alexander fought in the Battle of Chaeronea and defeated the Greek cities. Now, Macedonia was the master of Greece. Then Philip II was assassinated, and 20-year-old Alexander ascended to the throne. The era of Alexander the Great was beginning. There was a special bond between Aristotle and Alexander, but this bond was complex. Alexander loved Aristotle and wrote him letters full of praise. During his conquest journey, he sent Aristotle strange animals, unknown plants, exotic stones. He knew his teacher would enjoy examining these things. From India came elephant skin, from Egypt papyrus, from Persia strange plants. But at the same time, Alexander wasn't listening to Aristotle's advice. Aristotle had taught him that Greeks were superior, but when Alexander defeated the Persians, he saw them as equals, even wore their clothing, adopted their traditions. This disturbed Aristotle, because Alexander was changing too much, moving too far away. Alexander conquered Iran, conquered Egypt, went as far as India. He gradually became more despotic, declared himself a god, killed his critics. He even executed Aristotle's nephew Callisthenes because the young man had refused to prostrate himself before Alexander. When Aristotle received this news, he was devastated. He had lost his nephew and felt guilty. The philosopher and the warrior now lived in different worlds. Aristotle was seeking wisdom. Alexander was seeking victory. Aristotle taught moderation. Alexander lived without limits. Aristotle advocated the golden mean. Alexander went to extremes. They both loved each other, but could never fully understand each other because they were very different people. Perhaps this was Aristotle's greatest lesson: the gulf between thought and action, philosophy and power. While Alexander went east, Aristotle returned to Athens. He was 50 years old, a mature man. Now he wanted to establish his own school because he had much to say. He didn't return to the academy because he didn't want to live in Plato's shadow. He founded his own place and named it the Lyceum. The Lyceum was near the temple of Apollo Lysius in the east of Athens. This would be completely different from the academy. The academy was interested in mathematics and forms. The Lyceum would be interested in natural sciences, observation, reality. Aristotle discussed heavy topics with his closest students in the mornings, gave lessons to general audiences in the evenings. He loved teaching while walking, so his students were called peripatetics, those who do philosophy while walking. At the Lyceum, he started an incredible research program. This was more than a school. It was the first research institute. He gave assignments to his students. One group collected the laws of different cities. They compiled 158 different city constitutions, compared them, analyzed them. One group classified animals. They catalogued hundreds of animal species, recorded their similarities and differences. One group examined plants. One group tracked meteorological events. This was the first systematic scientific research, the first great knowledge-gathering project. And Aristotle wrote. Ceaselessly, tirelessly, he wrote. Every morning when he woke up, he sat at his desk, bent over papyri, filled his thoughts with words. First he worked on logic, and penned a series of works he called the Organon. With these works he founded the science of logic, because no one before had explained the rules of thought. So systematically, Aristotle developed the syllogism, the method of logical deduction. For example, he gave this example. All humans are mortal. Socrates is human, therefore Socrates is mortal. This seemed very simple, but was actually a revolutionary idea, because such inferences are certain, irrefutable. If there are two true premises, the third conclusion must be true, like mathematics, indisputable, clear. Aristotle was establishing the rules of logic, and these rules would remain valid for 2,000 years. Then he wrote the Metaphysics, and this was perhaps his deepest work. He discussed the nature of being. What does it mean when something exists? What is substance? What are matter and form? According to Aristotle, everything consists of matter and form. For example, a statue. The matter is marble, the form is the human shape. When the two come together, the statue emerges. Matter is potential. Form actualizes it. This idea was very important, because Aristotle was thus explaining change. Plato saw change as illusion. Aristotle saw change as the essence of reality. The acorn is a potential oak tree. When it falls to the ground, drinks water, sees the sun, it becomes actualized, becomes a real oak tree. The egg is a potential chicken. When it's warmed, its embryo develops, it becomes a chicken. Everything moves from potential to actuality, from possibility to reality. This is change. This is nature. Then he wrote the Nicomachean Ethics. In this work, he explained what a virtuous life is. How does one become a good person? What is happiness? According to Aristotle, happiness wasn't pleasure, wasn't money, wasn't fame. Happiness was living virtuously, bringing out the best version of one's character. and virtue was neither a talent nor knowledge. Virtue was habit, practice. For example, to be brave, you must act bravely. To be generous, you must act generously. Doing it once isn't enough. You must do it again and again. Then virtue becomes part of your character, becomes natural. Just like learning music. When you learn to play the piano, at first you struggle. But if you practice constantly, eventually you make your fingers go to the right keys automatically. And here's that famous golden mean doctrine. Virtue lies between two extremes. Courage is between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity is between stinginess and extravagance. Humility is between excessive humiliation and arrogance. A good person finds balance, avoids extremes, acts moderately in every situation. This was a simple but profound teaching and remains valid today. In his Politics, he examined state forms. Which form of government is best? Aristotle didn't design an imaginary state like Plato. Instead, he examined existing states, compared 158 city constitutions, observed which ones worked. Then he made a classification. There are 3 good forms, he said. Monarchy, where one person rules for everyone's good. Aristocracy, where the best rule for everyone's good. Polity, where the majority rules for everyone's good. There are 3 bad forms. Tyranny, where one person rules only for his own interest. Oligarchy, where the rich rule only for their own interests. Democracy, where the poor rule only for their own interests. The best system is a mixed system, he said. Balanced, moderate. A system where the middle class is strong. Because the middle class is neither very rich nor very poor, thinks balanced, doesn't go to extremes. In the Poetics, he analyzed art. Why is tragedy so effective? Because it creates catharsis, he said. Purification. The viewer experiences the hero's suffering, releases feelings of fear and pity, then feels relieved. Theater isn't just entertainment, it's also therapy, a spiritual cleansing. In his Physics, he explained motion and change. Why do things move? Every motion has a cause, he said. Nothing moves spontaneously. The stone falls to the ground because its natural place is the center. Fire rises upward because its natural place is the sky. And potential turns to actuality. The seed is a potential tree. When it becomes actualized, it becomes a real tree. Change is the essence of nature. And he came to the subject he was most passionate about, living things. In his History of Animals, he classified more than 500 animal species. He divided animals into those with blood and those without, observed each animal, drew its anatomy, recorded its life cycle. He was the first to recognize that dolphins were mammals. He observed that they breathe with lungs, bear live young, and nurse them. He studied the organization of bees, discovered the queen bee. He examined the heart and blood vessels, understood that the heart was a pumping system. This went beyond mere cataloging. It was comparative anatomy and biology. The foundation of modern science was being laid here. Aristotle also developed the doctrine of 4 causes. To fully explain something, we must answer 4 questions, he said. What is it made of? What shape does it have? Who made it? And most importantly, what is its purpose? Why does it exist? For example, let's think of a statue. It's made of marble, has human form. The sculptor made it. It was made to show beauty. Here are 4 questions, all together. The purpose question was especially important because according to Aristotle, everything had a purpose. The universe wasn't chance, it was full of purposes. The oak acorn grows because its purpose is to become an oak tree. Every seed carries its own purpose within. Every living thing tries to realize its own potential. There's a direction in the universe, a goal, a meaning. He worked at the Lyceum for 12 years, and these were the most productive years of his life. But then, in 323 BC, Alexander died at 32 years old in Babylon from a mysterious fever. Aristotle's protector was gone, and anti-Macedonian feelings suddenly rose in Athens. Athenians wanted their freedom back, wanted to be free from Macedonian domination. Aristotle was in danger because he came from Macedonia, was Alexander's teacher, was seen as a Macedonian sympathizer. They accused him of impiety, just as they had accused Socrates 74 years earlier. Same accusations, same danger. But Aristotle decided to flee this time as he said, "I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy." He remembered Socrates, didn't want to share the same fate. He left the Lyceum to his favorite student Theophrastus and fled to the island of Chalcis. But only a year later, at 62 years old, he died. It's said to be from stomach ailment, but it's not certain. In his will, he requested that slaves be freed, that he be buried next to his wife Pythias, that his books be given to Theophrastus. Thus Aristotle's story ended, but his works survived. Aristotle's works weren't lost, but had a strange adventure. After Theophrastus's death, they remained in a family's hands, hidden in a basement. Years later, they were found, moldy, damaged. Then they were copied, spread. In the Middle Ages, Arab philosophers discovered him and valued him greatly. Ibn Rushd, Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi read Aristotle, interpreted him, preserved him. While the West was in the Dark Ages, the East was keeping Aristotle alive. Then European Christians translated from Arabic to Latin. Thomas Aquinas combined him with Christianity. Aristotle's philosophy became the foundation of Christian theology. It became a textbook in universities. For 600 years, Aristotle was the king of science and philosophy. Dante called him the master of those who know. The Middle Ages called him simply the philosopher. No other name was needed. Of course, later some of his ideas were refuted. Galileo rejected his laws of physics. He was wrong about falling bodies because he hadn't experimented, only reasoned. Newton refuted his cosmology. Planets have no purpose, only gravity. Darwin developed his biology. Species change, aren't fixed. But Aristotle's logic remained dominant for 2,000 years. His ethics is still debated. Virtue ethics is still current. His biological classifications inspired Linnaeus. Comparative anatomy began with him. The scientific method comes from him. Observation, classification, explanation. He influenced Marx, Freud, Darwin, because they all loved categories, systems. Aristotle had systematized the world. Aristotle's story is a student's story, but a different student's one who loved his teacher but didn't obey him blindly, who emerged from Plato's shadow and lit his own flame, who examined the earth instead of the sky, who sought realities instead of ideals. And perhaps this is why he became the father of science. Aristotle taught us this. Answers are here, found through observation. Classify, compare, explain. Everything has both a cause and a purpose. Seek balance, avoid extremes. Think, but don't forget to observe. Respect your teacher, but don't stop critical thinking. Combine philosophy with science. Pass from potential to actuality. Realize yourself. This is why we still talk about him 2,400 years later. If you enjoy discovering these kinds of inspiring stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Share what you think about Aristotle in the comments. In our next video, we'll tell the story of another person who left their mark on history. See you. goodbye.